We teachers are truly innovative. Now we make sure that things are neat and proper, arranged and organized. It is our nature to go beyond what is seen by providing an extensive learning experience to our dear students. Hello and good day. We are now here to present to you the developed learning material entitled AIDEM, Adaptive Instructional and Developmental English Material for Tertiary Students. Before we continue with the presentation, allow me first to introduce the discussants individually. First in our list is Mr. Louis E. Evan, who is now working as an instructor at Colegio de Montalban. We have as well Miss Mary Grace A. Mones, who's now working as an office assistant at Tronson Plastic Manufacturing. Together with us is Miss Jem Darla M. Alcardo, who is now working at STI College Head Office. We also have Miss Maureen B. Vergara, who is now working as an executive assistant at Ronson Plastic Manufacturing. Here with us today is Miss Cleo Jane Marco, who is working as a graduate staff at Marikina Polytechnic College. And yours truly, Mr. Victor Emil Benito, who is working as an instructor at the University of Rizal System, Tanay Campus. Once again, we are your discussants for today's presentation.
As the world faced the global pandemic in the year 2020, the Philippines is one of the affected countries of the COVID-19. The government implemented lockdown in the areas that were severely affected. With the implementation of it, there were only limited people that were given permission to go outside that are not in the medical and security agencies. Due to that, the education sector is greatly affected. With that, the Commission on Higher Education released Memorandum Number 4, Series of 2020, or the Guidelines on the Implementation of Flexible Learning. The higher education institutions were instructed to explore different and flexible learning modalities to deliver quality education even we were in the midst of pandemic. Since Marikina Polytechnic College is still in flexible learning, the tertiary group decided to make a learning material for proposed communication. The said subject is offered for first-year students of the college. The group tapped Mrs. Josephine M. Mangawang for them to administer the multiple intelligence inventory test. She then assigned the group to one of her Bachelor of Science Entrepreneurship, specializing shoe and leather goods marketing classes. The learning material is based on the result of the MI inventory test given to them through Google Form. The material is crafted following the principles of direct method and contextualization approach. Upon writing the learning material, the group have decided to integrate technology as well through the use of QR codes. These codes will lead the students to their activities in Google Form or Word file once they scan it. Eventually, they will be answering it and submit it to their instructor once they are done. Statement of the problem. 1. What are the five dominant multiple intelligences of the students based on the MI inventory test administered to them? 2. What is the evaluation of the instructor on the developed learning material with respect to the following criteria? First, organization. Second, content. And third, inclusion. 3. What theory, method, and approach were used on the developed learning material? This is the multiple intelligence inventory test based on Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. There are 8 multiple intelligences: verbal linguistic, logical mathematical, visual spatial, interpersonal, musical, naturalistic, body kinesthetic, and intrapersonal. This test is administered to BS Entrepreneurship 1D under the supervisory of Mrs. Josephine M. Mangawang. There are 24 out of 43 students who answered the test. The table presented is the result of the multiple intelligence inventory test of the 24 students of BSN Chap 1D. The top 5 identified multiple intelligences are the following: visual, interpersonal, musical, naturalistic, and intrapersonal, with the average ranks of 4.58, 4.44, 3.88, 4.50, and 2.71 respectively. Rank 1 is intrapersonal, rank 2 is musical, rank 3 is interpersonal, rank 4 is naturalistic, and rank 5 is visual.
To understand further, we use CAELM system approach, integrating the use of input, process, and output, wherein the first frame shows the input of the study, where we assimilate the theory, approach, and method to solidify the content of the developed learning material. Furthermore, is the use of MI inventory test to determine the students' multiple intelligences. Frame 2 is the process where content validation, gathering of data, and analysis and interpretation take place. Moreover, Frame 3 includes the output, where this includes the crafted learning material titled Adaptive, Instructional, and Developmental English Material, or AIDEM. In addition is that we use the arrow to represent feedback from the evaluation made by the instructor to assess the developed learning material based on certain criteria and standard.
Now let's discuss the theory used in crafting this learning material. Now in this learning material, we have used the theory introduced by Howard Gardner, which is known to be as multiple intelligence. As it was mentioned earlier, Gardner's multiple intelligence was used as a basis to identify the learner's unique intelligence through an inventory test.
The parts of the learning material are: number 1, introduction; number 2, objective; number 3, lesson content; number 4, assessment activities; and the last are the learning tasks. The first part of the learning material is the introduction. The introduction is the part where the lesson is established to give the learner some context, structure, and a direction about the content they are about to dive into. In the lesson opening, the learning is put into context. Students develop an understanding of why the learning is important and how they will know if they are successful. The lesson introduction also provides a hook to get students thinking about the learning to come. The second part is the objective. Objectives are broad generalized statements about what is to be learned. It is a common feature of most modules. It explains the knowledge, the skills, and attitudes you want to teach. Learning objectives should be used to guide the students as they work through the course and to assess their learning progress. The third part is the lesson content. It is a thorough discussion of the concepts and topics covered in the learning material. This aims to help the learner discover and understand new concepts and skills. Next is the assessment activities. It is a tool for learners and teachers to use to evaluate learning achievements in the module. Coupled with feedback from the teacher, it helps students to improve their learning and achieve better outcomes. It is also a source of encouragement and builds confidence. The last part of our learning material is the learning task. These are activities designed to encourage students to pause on their study and check their understanding of what they are learning. The activities are based on preceding sections of the study session or may refer back to earlier study sessions in the same module, or invite students to consider how their own experiences are relevant to the topic.
By embedding instructions in familiar contexts, learners are more likely to learn. This is what Andreadis wrote in his article about contextualization. So contextualization engages students in active learning while assisting them to make meaning out of the information they are obtaining. Contextualized instruction links the learning of foundation skills with academic or occupational content by focusing teaching and learning squarely on concrete applications in a specific context that is of interest to the student. Now let us speak to one of the lessons of the module. Here you will see in lesson 5, which is evaluating messages or images of different types of text reflecting different cultures. The module used sample shoe advertisements where the students of BS entrepreneurship will more likely to relate and learn how they will apply it in their chosen field of specialization. Even in the task, students will be able to familiarize key terms by using relevant examples and real-life situations as an entrepreneur. Therefore, let us answer the question, why use contextualization in this module? First, it makes learning relevant. Second, it engages and motivates entrepreneur students. Next is it increases learners' confidence and enthusiasm, and it enhances interest in long-term goals in their chosen field.
In the learning material we have developed, we targeted to use the direct method of teaching. The direct method of teaching was established to immerse the learner in the same way as when the first language is learned. The first strength of direct method comes from the fact that it is a natural method. Because it replicates how we learn our native language, it feels more intuitive to our students and allows them to learn English more deeply than any other methods. The direct method is a teaching technique of foreign language in which only the target language is used. It is to convey directly into the second language through demonstrations and visual aids. In the direct method, spoken word was given primacy. The students were taught in target language. Instruction material were presented orally with the help of actions and pictures instead of printed forms. Learners were not allowed to use mother or native language to learn target language. And the most important aspect of language learning in direct method was the practice of culture in true sense. Oral communication is the main objective. The direct approach focuses on the speaking far more than the importance of reading and writing. This practice is the complete opposite of the grammar translation approach, where students learn all the rules of a language but often cannot speak or communicate effectively in the second language. Using the direct method, teachers encourage the student to speak, even to make grammatical mistakes, so they can get to their point across and put into practice what they are learning in the classroom. One of the example of the direct method that you can find in our learning materials is in lesson 4, task 2. In this task, the students will look for a partner, it can be a trio or a group, and each group will be given one of the distinct registers. It can be formal, consultative, casual, and intimate. For formal, it is a symposium with different entrepreneurs in Marikina City. For consultative, it is a consultation between veteran craftsmen and beginner craftsmen and BS entrepreneurship students from Marikina Polytechnic College. For casual, this is where the parents gave advice to their children on why they should take the BS entrepreneurship, specializing in shoe and leather goods marketing. And lastly, for intimate, this is where friends, classmates, best friends talking about the course BS Entrepreneurship, specializing in shoe and leather goods marketing, and why they took the program. After they already have grouped themselves and they already given the distinct registers assigned to them, they will create a skit for 5 minutes showing the distinct register assigned. The output for this task will be rated based on the rubric with the criteria of organization of ideas, which means the concept and ideas were clearly delivered during the presentation, clarity of speech, which means the presenters were able to showcase an explanatory performance in pronouncing and delivery of words, where words are clearly mentioned and there were no mispronounced or misused grammar. Mastery of English, which means the presenters were able to use English all throughout the presentation. Presentation of characters, meaning it is the convincing communication of each character's feelings, situations, and motives. And lastly is the overall impression. It means the excellent presentation. The presentation was excellent, entertaining, and informative.
Now let's continue with the evaluation. Now this learning material evaluation rubric was adapted and modified from the instructional material evaluation rubric found in the Career and Technical Education program of Nevada Department of Education. Now, there were three criteria mentioned, and these are organization, content, and inclusion. Now, in this rubric, there are two scales. One is meets. Now, this signifies if the indicator for each criteria was met. On the other hand, is inadequate, which means that the indicator was not fulfilled. For reference, here is a sample learning evaluation rubric. To measure the totality of the evaluation, we came up with a scale to further interpret the gathered data. Now let's first discuss table number 1, which is a summary of evaluation made by the first evaluator. Now the table shows the result of the evaluation made by the first evaluator. It is evident that inclusion criterion obtained the highest frequency of meets obtained with 3 out of 3 indicators, or 100% of the criteria. It is followed by the organization criterion, which earned 90%, which is 9 out of 10 indicators. On the other hand, content garnered a frequency of 9 out of 12 indicators, or almost 75% of the criteria. Now let's continue with table number 2, the summary of evaluation by the second evaluator. Now the table below shows, as for the evaluation made, the organization criterion earned the highest frequency out of its 10 indicators with 8 or 80% of the total criteria. Meanwhile, both content and inclusion criteria reached 66.7% of the total criterion, which is 8 out of 12 and 2 out of 3 indicators for each criterion respectively. Moving forward, we have table number 3, which is a summary of evaluation by the third evaluator. Now, the table depicts the result made by the evaluator wherein organization criterion obtained the highest frequency of 9 out of 10 indicators, or 90% of the criterion. It is followed by content criterion with 9 out of 12 indicators of the criterion, that is 75% of the content. Meanwhile, inclusion holds the lowest with only 33.3% of the total criterion, or only one out of three indicators was met. Now let's continue with table number 4, which is a summary of evaluation made by the fourth evaluator. Now the table indicates the result of the evaluation where the highest obtained frequency was garnered with 9 or 90% by the organization criterion. Furthermore, inclusion criterion came in second, which earned 2 out of 3 indicators, or 66.7% of the total criterion was met. Lastly is the content criterion, which only reached 50%, that is 6 out of 12 indicators in the criteria. As a result, this composite table shows the total frequency points earned from the evaluation. Now, in total, there are 25 indicators for the three criteria, which makes the 25 points as the highest frequency to reach. The scale was already discussed earlier. So, based on the summary, it is identified that the developed learning material earned the highest frequency of 21, followed by 19 and 18, which were all interpreted as most criteria were met. Meanwhile, the developed learning material also earned the frequency of 17, which is verbally interpreted as some criteria were met. With an average of 18.8, verbally interpreted as most criteria were met, it is evident that the developed learning material has satisfactorily able to reach the criteria needed for the learning material to be considered as useful and effective in the teaching learning process. Now, for the conclusions, based from the result of the test and evaluation, the following conclusions were drawn. Visual, interpersonal, musical, naturalistic, and intrapersonal were the five multiple intelligences that dominated the MI inventory test. Based from the evaluation, it is evident that the developed learning material was able to meet the criteria from the evaluation form, as it was verbally interpreted as most of the criteria were met. Lastly, direct method, contextualization, and multiple intelligence were the method, approach, and theory used respectively in developing the learning material. As for the recommendations, based from the conclusions and result of the evaluation, the following recommendations were drawn. First, least multiple intelligences from this material can be used as basis for another learning material. Second, the indicators that were considered as inadequate based from the evaluation must be worked on, as this may contribute meaningfully in finalizing the module's content. Third, the use of other approaches or methods such as task-based, text-driven, and total physical response can be used in other form of learning material for this level. And lastly, the result of the multiple intelligence inventory test and evaluation can be used as basis for future and further studies. And that's the end of the presentation. Once again, thank you so much for actively listening to our presentation. Once again, thank you and mabuhay.